Hello, everybody. We are now going to begin our discussion of Chapter 12, which is titled The Victorian Era. This is stuff that might still be haunting your houses or your grandmother or great-grandmother's houses. Victorian interior design is a product of the Industrial Revolution, where machinery made it possible for the middle class to own highly ornate pieces. As the middle class became more affluent, they sought to demonstrate their newfound wealth with items that had previously only belonged to people of the upper classes. These items included architectural features that are common in Victorian decorating, such as tin ceiling panels, wall sconces, and tapestries. For most Victorian households, having lots of decorative items was considered a sign of good taste. The more, the better. Sparse furnishings indicated that the home was owned by someone of a lower class. By the way, one of our great architectural histories here in Grand Rapids is Heritage Hill, and almost all of those very, very large structures that have received historic status on Heritage Hill are Victorian mansions and Victorian houses. So just to give you a little bit of FYI. And also the reason why it's called the Victorian era is because it's very much associated, even though also very popular here in America, is very much associated with the reign of Queen Victoria in England. So for lighting in the Victorian era, mood lighting in dining rooms and entryways was considered essential to the Victorians. Most lighting came from wall sconces and candles, where decorative lamps achieved prominence towards the latter half of the movement. Tiffany was a popular design of the time. Louis Comfort Tiffany, who's known for his stained glass designs, but also his lamp and lighting designs. Essentially, an authentic Tiffany lamp or design inspired by Tiffany can help create the Victorian atmosphere in your own home. In fact, I myself have created a Tiffany design lamp. It's one of the dragonfly lamps, if you've ever seen them before. Wall coverings became very popular at this time, so dark, rich paint colors were very typical for Victorians, especially in city houses. This characteristic had less to do with the color design philosophy and more to do with the rampant pollution in the city that stained lighter colored walls. Hunter green and deep crimson are both considered authentic to the time period. At the start of the Victorian era, floral wallpaper was used throughout the home. Most of the wallpaper used red, blue, or green with tan accents. In the later Victorian period, these florals gave way to stylized leaf patterns and wallpaper in earth tones, in keeping with the popular Gothic-inspired design of the time. Tapestry were also common at this time and were used in conjunction with both paint and wallpaper. Once again, nature scenes continued to be popular. In terms of window treatments, curtains were the preferred window treatment in the Victorian era. Made of rich, heavy fabrics, curtains were pleated and hung over gilded curtain rods. To add further opulence, the curtains were lined with silk or wool to give them an even more luxurious appearance. For flooring, several different floor types were very common in the Victorian era. Parquet, wood floors, tile designs, also carpeting that were made on broad looms, and Venetian carpeting and also reversible carpeting were quite popular. And also floor cloths that you and I are starting to see the comeback of today, oilcloths similar to linoleum. In terms of furniture, the Industrial Revolution ushered in a whole new age of furniture manufacturing, allowing it to be produced on a large scale and driving the prices of pieces down. In terms of furniture style, Victorians often looked to either the past or to their colonies. Curved edges and scrolls, a la 18th century French furniture, was the most popular style in the early and middle Victorian periods. In the late Victorian period, overstuffed furniture inspired by Eastern designs came into favor. So in other words, guys, what we're seeing here is a period that means that more means more. It is highly decorated everywhere. In fact, one person that was a fan of the Victorian era loved it, but talked about how it was so easy to trip over things because people's houses were filled with furniture and filled with all kinds of stuff. Nowhere was there anything plain to be seen. So then let's go on here to the very first work on your list, and this is by Richard Norman Shaw. This is called The Drawing Room, and it is in a house known as the Swan House. And guys, try as I might to find color versions of this house, I just could not find anyway. So we are relegated to using relatively poor quality photographs, unfortunately. So the British architect and urban designer known for his residential architecture and for his role in the English domestic revival movement was, of course, Richard Norman Shaw. After an apprenticeship to William Byrne, another well-known architect, Shaw attended the architectural school of the Royal Academy of Arts in London. That was a big deal. That was the primary school in London, the equivalent of the École des Beaux-Arts in France. Architecturally, the structure was relevant both to the Queen Anne Revival and also to the arts and crafts movement. It was built by Shaw for the artistic patrons Wickham and Elizabeth Flower. Jones and Woodward, in their Guide to the Architecture of London, a book that was very popular at the time, considered Swan House to be the finest Queen Anne Revival domestic building in London. So I would like you to know that for significance, please, was considered the finest Queen Anne Revival building of the time. Domestic building, sorry. It was considered the finest Queen Anne Revival domestic building in London at the time. The building itself owes its name to its location on the site where it was an inn named the Swan. Shaw designed the lower part of the building in the Queen Anne Revival style, popular during the Victorian era. He incorporated bay windows on the second floor. Let me give you a view of that. He incorporated bay windows on the second floor and dormer windows at the top floor for an unusual look. On the third floor, you can see right here, you can see tiny little windows that actually come out and away from the surface of the building, alternating with typical flatter windows. On the third floor, Shaw alternated flat, narrow windows with caged, what are called oriel windows. Oriel is spelled O-R-I-E-L. So what you have here is a different treatment for every level of the house, and that is something I would like you to know, please, for significance, please, is that each level has a different treatment on the facade. Each level has a different treatment on the facade. Wickham Flower was a patron of the arts as well. He actually hired the firm of designer William Morris to decorate the Swan House. Flower also bought 2 paintings from his good friend, American expatriate artist James Whistler, to display in his home. Now, what I love about this, if you can see the door, remember that this was originally an inn that was called the Swan, and so that's why it continued to be called the Swan House, even after it was turned into an individually owned house. But look at the doors, aren't they fun? And then not only that, but if you look in through here, you actually see a swan on the window that you see here, that's on that second level. And then also, even though you can't see it here, you can barely make it out right here on the left image where my pointer is right now. There is actually a little bit of a concrete insert here that actually shows a very large swan here as well. So that little detail is what sets a building off from being just a normal everyday building to one that has more of a unique touch. So going back to the interior shot that you can see here, again, the image that's on your left, the quality is not as good, but if you guys can see, there is not only wallpaper trim along the top, you have a decorated cornice that looks like it is egg and dart, referring to the classical period. Then we have another layer here of another type of matching wallpaper, and then from here below we have wood paneling of the dado. Notice the interesting couch design, how the back comes up and around and almost embraces the person who's sitting in it. And just decoration every single place, and it's pattern on top of pattern on top of pattern on top of pattern, and again just absolutely filled with furniture and different styles of furniture versus what we'd seen earlier on where the furniture was relatively remote when we see the early colonial period, but also even for that growing taste in ornament becomes very much higher during the Victorian era. So another significance I'd like you to know is that the Victorian era is known for being filled with ornament. Victorian era, known for being filled with ornament. pattern on top of pattern on top of pattern. Another significance I'd like you to add is that the interior was designed by William Morris. If you look at your slide list, we're actually going to visit a few William Morris wallpaper designs that were also adapted to other elements as well as the interior. So another significance for the Shaw drawing room of the Swan House, I would also like you to know that the interior was designed by William Morris. Interior designed by William Morris. Next on your list, again, is Kingscote. And what we see here are, again, additions by the architectural firm known as McKim, Mead & White. By the way, McKim, Mead & White actually designed Penn Station in New York City. Unfortunately, it was closed down and later deconstructed. However, it has been since rebuilt, but not to the status that it once had. Upjohn was actually one of the promoters of the Gothic Revival, and Kingscote is a landmark of the Gothic Revival style in American architecture. Its appearance in Newport, Connecticut, marked the beginning of what was called the cottage boom that brought fame to the town throughout the 19th century. So I would like you to know for your first significance for this one, please, that this is known as Gothic Revival. Again, this is the great age of revivals, and we're seeing that here. So Gothic Revival, please. So in 1839, a Southern planter George Noble Jones commissioned architect Richard Upjohn to design a summer cottage along a country road known as Bellevue Avenue on the outskirts of Newport. Upjohn created a highly original, what was called cottage orne, O-R-N-E, and essentially what that means is ornamental cottage in the Gothic Revival style. The general effect was romantic, a fanciful composition of towers, windows, Gothic arches, and porch roofs inspired by medieval tournament tents. So look at this, and yeah, it is very Gothic, is it not? Now what's interesting is that it's also quite Victorian, because if you were to look at this and take a little bit of the medieval features off, this could easily be a house that we would see in Heritage Hill today. So let's go back a little bit further here. Again, notice that we have a tower feeling to the right, even though not tremendously tall. Another feeling of a tower here. Notice too the asymmetrical planning of the structure itself, very Gothic. No sense of balance, harmony, and symmetry here. Also porch roofs, and the element that you see in through here almost feels like those scalloped edges of, again, medieval tournament tents, which I think is really, really fun. So another significance I'd like you to know is that this is in the cottage orne style. It is in the cottage orne style. And again, that's cottage, but second word, O-R-N-E. And what that essentially means is ornamental cottage. Now, what's interesting is that because this style was just beginning to be popular at this time, we know that Newport, and more specifically the area where this house is located, started creating more and more of these cottage orne style buildings and really puts Newport on the map, so to speak, architecturally. So Kingscote had many of the characteristics of that Gothic Revival style. The central bay features a pointed Gothic arch window with scroll verge boards, also called gingerbread, under the eaves of the roof. So again, we can see that pointed arch bay here where the main entry is, and we see a little bit of effect of gingerbread here. Scrolled verge boards. We also see it in through here, and we also see it in through here, through the porch on this side, and over the pointed edges of the tops of the windows over here. A finial projects from the peak of the gable, and as you can see that here, the gabled edge here, the finial peaks from that. The crenellations on top of the first floor were inspired by the openings in castle walls and the towers of the Middle Ages. Going on from there, the entrance porch is painted in striped colors and has a wooden border of pendants meant to recall the tents of a medieval jousting tournament. The front door repeats the Gothic architectural theme. The diamond-paned casement windows are of late medieval inspiration. And let me see if I can enlarge that for you. And no, I'm sorry, I cannot enlarge that for you. A label mold, sometimes known as a hood or drip mold, surrounds the top of the window. Decorative pendants also adorn the gable. So, and this is that crenellated portion I was mentioning earlier. Again, crenellations. Again, if this was larger and more on the top of the tower, it would be in the medieval inspired structures and even during the medieval time, but also along the roofline here. What would happen is you, size-wise, this is not correct, but you would be able to hide behind the upper areas here, and then when you were ready to shoot at somebody with your arrow or the other type of weapon, then you would come out from the edge here where this area is open, and then literally look out from there, but then hide back behind the crenellation itself. So very, very Gothic inspired. So another significance, please, is that it recalls medieval tournament tents. Again, it recalls medieval tournament tents. By the way, medieval, M-E-D-I-E-V-A-L. The porch was an essential element of Gothic Revival architecture that bridged the gap between the interiors and the outdoors, uniting the inhabitants with nature. The porch roof is supported by Gothic colonnettes, and you can see that right through here. And we also see slender columns grouped together to form a single support. So again, let me see if I can enlarge that for you a little bit more here. No, of course I can't. Sorry about that, guys. The firm of McKim, Mead & White was commissioned to design the 1881 dining room, notable for its Tiffany glass patterns, or Tiffany glass panels, excuse me. So you are not looking at the dining room, however, you are looking at the entryway. The entryway is right here. You can see the door as you come in, and then you have these pointed arches in through here, okay? Notice the bold coloration of Victorian style houses. They love their bold colors. Not only that, but we have, as I mentioned before, parquet floors and an excessive amount of trim work and an excessive amount of patterning. Even though the walls are not covered with a wallpaper above the dado, notice that the dado itself also has this crenellated form, or technically it's more of a pointed arch, even trefoil shape arch here on the dado. And then up above, even though there is no wallpaper on the walls, what you do see, or patterned wallpaper on the walls, I should add, is that you do see a proliferation of artwork on the walls. And of course, remember that they very much liked very, very modern artists at the time. And then even though abstraction was not around yet, very hip artists at the time, and then line their walls with very, very well-known artists' works. Notice too that even though it's not a coffered ceiling here, it has that feeling, and it reflects very much the pattern that we see on the parquet floors itself. So given that, another significance, please, is that it shows the Victorian preference for bold colors. Again, shows the Victorian preference for bold colors. Next on your list is one that I think that you will find very, very interesting, and this is by a man named Calvert Vaux and Frederick E. Church, and this is called Olana. I'm telling you right now, guys, if I could buy it, I would, and I would say goodbye. The date on this is 1874 to 89. It is actually owned by the architect himself. This is Frederick Church and his wife Isabel. In the fall of 1869, Frederick and Isabel Church returned to America from an 18-month-long trip to Europe and the Middle East. They loved to travel. While living in a very smaller cottage, they decided to build another house, one that was much larger and more permanent. Impressed by the architecture that they saw in cities like Beirut, Jerusalem, and Damascus, they envisioned a home that incorporated Middle Eastern elements and designs. So, significance, please. Is it influenced by their Middle Eastern travels? Influenced by their Middle Eastern travels. Olana is actually the Latin name for a place in Persia that they actually visited. The main house at Olana simply sits impressively at the top of a very, very long sloped edge of land, and you can see it right here. Isn't that absolutely stunning? And again, if you think about kind of like a Gothic Revival style, it's very, very asymmetrical. There's no sense of balance with the structure at all, even though it mixes a little Victorian, a little Gothic, and also a little Middle Eastern. We'll talk more about that in a second. So it sits along this long slope. It is a unique mixture of Victorian architectural elements and Middle Eastern decorative motifs. Stylistically, the building is a villa, which is a country house, with an asymmetrical massing of towers and block masonry, punctuated by fanciful windows and porches. So you can see that there's actually a porch here. You see people gathering outside. You also see probably tourists, I'm not sure, on the outer edge here. You have an open area here, and you have another open area here. But again, this kind of penchant for the Gothic, but also notice the pointed arch. Remember too that we discussed this when we discussed Gothic architecture, is that the pointed arch actually originated in the Middle East. So it certainly makes sense. So the irregular silhouette of the exterior contrasts with the more regular rhythms of the rooms arranged around a central hall. On the exterior, though, however, Middle Eastern motifs are carried out in colored brick, as you can see with my details here. They also used slate, ceramic tile, and especially stenciling. By the way, this is, if you look at my pointer here, the lower right image, this is all slate tile being used in different colors to create this beautiful pattern. But then all the area that you see in through here is actually stenciling. So that is all painted. Now it is painted in the original pattern, and they did try to match the original colors, but after many, many decades, the colors faded. So this has actually been repainted, but in the original colors. Look to here at this middle lower image. Again, that pointed arch, very typical of Middle Eastern architecture. And you also see references to the Star of David. And you also see a bit of an Indian interest in mosaics in through here as well. So the main house, again, uses ornamental motifs such as stencils and even on the cornices, like I said here, but it also continues down. You can see it all the way down the space. Even the areas that were meant to bring out like shades are also striped, giving it another level of ornamented. Hundreds of pencil and oil sketches for the stencils by Frederick Church survive at Olana, as well as the stencils themselves, with the original paint in some areas of the house. Church actually drew inspiration from several scholarly large format illustrated books that documented the architecture of Arab lands. He often translated the tile work, metalwork, and stone carving of Islamic mosques into stencil patterns. At least 20 colors are used in the stencils, including gold and aluminum. So actually, let me continue on here. I love this house, and before I get too distracted and start going off on a tangent with how much I love it, I really want to focus on my notes, so sorry about that. Beyond the stencils ornamenting the interior and the exterior, and again, you can see stenciling on the walls and through here, but a little bit more reserved. But you also see the influences of tiles here on the small fireplace, and also the influence of Islamic materials here that almost look shrine-like here. Also Asian and even Oriental style carpeting here. Persian carpeting is very, very well known at this time, and even today it is considered to be a luxury good. So then going on from there, chief among them are the many arched windows and door openings that frame the views. And you can see one right here. This is actually a squared window, but if you look at it, the glass that is used to frame the edges of the window are actually pointed in arches as well. The window lighting on the main staircase faces north and has no view. To make the most of this situation, Church devised a pattern of cut paper that he sandwiched between panes of amber glass. Example right here, okay, that imitates what is called a mashrabaya, a carved wooden screen found in the windows of many Middle Eastern houses. It also then introduces a golden light to the court hall, just as much as stained glass in the Gothic period imparted this colored light on the interior of the structure itself. So together, the various motifs here and themes bring and create a unique artistic unity, one that is very, very hard to categorize. So it is a mixture not only of Gothic, but also of Victorian and also Middle Eastern, and then more specifically, a little Islamic as well. So another significance, please, okay, is that its mixture of styles makes the structure very unique. Mixture of styles makes the structure very unique. Again, you see a predominance of patterning just everywhere. And remember too that he used many different motifs. He used tile, he used slate, he used a mosaic feeling, he used Islamic patterning, he also used stenciling. So he used many different mediums that focus on that heavy emphasis on patterning. So another significance, please, is that he used many different mediums with an emphasis on patterning. Many different mediums with focus on patterning. Yeah, I think it's just absolutely gorgeous. So again, guys, look at the proliferation of materials. Very typical, very typical Victorian. You have several different styles of chairs here. Obviously, not all of it is original, but then we have these odd crane-like sculptures here. And in front of them are plants. You see artificial plants. You see pots. You see little vignettes. You see drapery. The amber glass here. You see the pointed arches, the feeling of the stenciling, and quite honestly, even though this is colored, it reminds me very much of the foliage that you can see on the facade of the Taj Mahal. This reminds me very much of the patterning that you oftentimes see in Persian carpets. Of course, you have that kind of lantern-like style, and by this way, this is called a lantern style pattern. And you see that down here as well on the carpet. Notice that there is carpet going up the stairs. There's actually a vase on the stairs. Obviously, that would not have been put there purposefully. And even back and through here, it actually looks like a little Buddhist sculpture here. So very, very interesting. And the octagonal table that you see here looks very, very, how shall I say this? Not Mediterranean. It looks very Middle Eastern. And even the idea of the oil, even though it clearly is like a pitcher, it almost has the feeling of it being a hookah. So very, very interesting and very, very much tied up with their love of travel, bringing all those elements into their own house. And I think we all do that to a certain extent, don't we? I know I do. So let's move on. Oh, I just absolutely love it. Just love it. Can you imagine the upkeep on this though? Yeah, you definitely have to have a little money to live here. All right, so let's move on to the furniture maker whose name was Thonet. So actually the Thonet brothers themselves actually worked together, and what you see is Thonet himself was the son of the master tanner whose job was to essentially tan leather, Franz Anton Thonet of Beaupard. So what you're seeing here on the right is actually a catalog page with bentwood rockers. The date on this is 1867. Now I will be honest with you, I was able to find this online. Your book only shows this one page. However, you can see that when I was found the image, it actually included this page as well. I ended up cutting that out because I'm going to use several different references to the bentwood rocker in your next image. So I will show you a couple other images here. Gebruder, by the way, is catalog, or excuse me, not catalog, brothers Thonet. So Thonet themselves, the brothers Thonet, they actually set themselves up as independent cabinet makers in 1819. In 1830, Michael Thonet, not Franz, but Michael Thonet, began experimenting with what was soon to be known as bentwood furniture. Thonet's essential breakthrough was his success in having a very light but strong wood bent into curved, graceful shapes by forming the wood in hot steam. This would enable him to design entirely novel, elegant, lightweight, durable, strong, and comfortable furniture, which appealed strongly to a fashion completely different than what we had seen in the past, which is so heavy, so carved, so monumental. So you can see that even though it's still a very strong furniture and still very patterned and very lively, it has a lot of negative space, meaning a lot of air that works through the design itself. So going on a little bit further here, its aesthetic was very, very popular at the time. It was also a very functional piece because it was light, it was easy to move around, and it was very, very much appealing to many people, and it made a great splash, so to speak. So, significance, please, is that he was the innovator of bentwood furniture. innovator of bentwood furniture. Notice that bentwood is one word. Now, with bentwood furniture, one of the characteristics that made it so nice was not only the bentwood, because that lends it as something very different than nobody had seen before, but also because it's very strong and also very lightweight, but also quite comfortable. If you've ever sat in a bentwood chair, even though of course you and I are used to sitting in highly upholstered, highly padded furniture today that's very comfortable, back then this was a quite comfortable chair to sit in, and quite honestly they are as well today, even though I wouldn't necessarily think I want to sit in them for hours like I do with when I teach, but at the same time it's not bad at all. So another significance, please, is that bentwood was lightweight, strong, and comfortable. Lightweight, strong, and comfortable. The name Thonnet quickly becomes synonymous with a high standard of exquisite craftsmanship, and Thonnet's bentwood products soon joined the ranks of the most famous and most imitated furniture product of modern times. During the late 19th century, many bentwood furniture designs were created by Thonnet with the help of unknown artists and artisans. However, by the turn of the century, a new design trend had emerged, and furniture manufacturers began recruiting renowned artists, in other words, well-known artists, and architects of the time to create innovative new products. Throughout the early 20th century, the volume, expertise, and reach of the Thonnet Company's manufacturing capabilities attracted many of the world's leading designers: the German Otto Wagner, the German Marcel Breuer, the Swiss architect whose name was Le Corbusier, also known as Le Corbu, and also Mies van der Rohe, also known as Mies. Now, the bentwood chair, more specifically known as the 1859 chair number 14, is still called the chair of chairs, with some 50 million produced and still in production today. The innovative bending technique allowed for the industrial production of a chair for the first time ever. What was revolutionary about the former number 14 chair, now today called the number 214, was the fact that it could be disassembled into a few components and thus produced in a work-sharing process. And guys, this is your number 14 right here. That's your number 14 right here. Okay, very, very basic. I'm sure you guys have probably all seen one of these before. So the chair could then be exported to all nations of the world in simple, space-saving packages. 36 disassembled chairs could all fit into 1 cubic meter box. That's amazing. It yielded a gold medal for Thonnet's enterprise at the 1867 Paris World's Fair. Significance, please, is that was the first time there was an industrial production of a chair. Again, it was the first time there was an industrial production of a chair. And then another significance is that it could be disassembled and assembled quickly. It could be disassembled and assembled quickly. And like I said, it did actually win him a furniture design prize in 1867 at Paris's World's Fair. In 1941, a demand for their furniture in the U.S. continued to grow. In fact, let me move this along to some other images that you perhaps more readily recognize. And again, your basic 14 is right here. And again, they begin to be a little bit more elaborate here. And even this one, this almost, well, it has like a little footrest on it. But notice how he begins applying it to all different types of things, even cradle design, even the bentwood of a high chair, and even with furniture pieces beyond just a chair. So in 1941, as demand for the furniture in the USA continued to grow, Thonnet came to the US and began production in Statesville, North Carolina. And as you guys know, or you should know, North Carolina was a furniture making mecca. Soon after, they added locations in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and also in New York City, where the factory was outfitted with state-of-the-art radio frequency bending equipment to produce the highest quality plywood furniture parts available at this time. The idea of using bent plywood to produce chairs became increasingly popular during the middle of the 20th century as the technology was evolving rapidly. No one knows who was really first to use bent plywood for seating during this period. However, it is indisputable that this process traces back to Michael Thonet's patent in the mid-1800s, more than 100 years before anyone else. That is amazing. So plywood. Plywood itself, very, very light, but you can even conceive of using bamboo to do this, and even other reed-like materials. It becomes quite popular, and because it was mass-produced, it also became cheaper and more affordable to the middle class. So another significance, please, is that the mass production allowed for the middle class to afford it. Okay, mass production allowed for purchase by the middle class, essentially. Have you seen these? I'm relatively sure that you have, even though they're not as popular today, but back in the 80s and even the 70s, they were very, very popular. And chances are your mother or your grandmother, grandfather, or even great-grandparents had some as well. But as much as you see this looking very light and looks like a lot of air can pass through these areas, now let's turn on to a very, very monumental style of sofa that was also very popular during the Victorian era. Yes, very, very different, right? This is John Henry Belter's sofa from 1850 approximately. So he was born in Germany, and John Henry Belter spent his early years as an apprentice to cabinet makers and woodworkers in Stuttgart in the Württemberg province. He left Germany in 1833, and at 29 years old, he left for New York City. He opened his own shop as a cabinet manufacturer in 1844, and later opened a factory as his company expanded. Belter was working during the Rococo Revival time, which was a time of naturalistic designs and ornamental details. Rococo Furniture Revival is distinguished by cabriole legs, and you guys can see them here. So again, this is Rococo Revival, okay. Undulating seat rails, you can see those here, okay, as it comes back and forward and back and forward, okay. And also, excuse me, let me catch up in my notes here. Carved flowers and fruit, and you see that all in through here. Carved flowers and fruit, grapes, and what appear like roses, and even a little bit like a feeling of a basket here on this side and on this side. Let me see if I can enlarge that for you a little bit here. Nope, I can't. I'll come back to those others in just a second here. All right. So with the Rococo Revival making its way through America, skilled European-trained cabinet makers were renowned for working in this style that Belter, and Belter was no exception. So, significance, please, is that this is Rococo Revival style furniture. Rococo Revival style furniture. Again, Rococo known for these curving, undulating lines, and even though quite honestly it's enough of a monumental piece of furniture that I would even say that you can throw a little Baroque in there as well, but in general it's regarded as Rococo Revival. So how was it made? How was it made? This is not just a big chunk of wood that is then carved. No, 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 because that would be very time consuming and also very hard to do and quite expensive. So Belter was known for his wood lamination process, something that he did not invent, but he perfected, and then he actually goes on to patent it. Essentially what it used were paper-thin sheets of wood that were glued together. So let me give you another significance, please, is that he was known for perfecting the wood lamination process. Again, he was known for perfecting the wood lamination process. So again, the sofas were made around 1850 at this time by the shops of Belter using a particular wood lamination method that he created, where you would fuse together 6 or more paper-thin layers of rosewood veneer that you would then steam, and then you would heat it under extreme pressure, and that steam and that pressure would then allow the wood to be bent, okay? It would be bent and molded into three-dimensional curves. So again, these these veneer sheets of rosewood would be veneered together, okay? They were veneers, but they would be molded together, and then they would be highly steamed and put under great pressure, and that steam softened the wood, which then allowed them to be put into molds and into three-dimensional curves. The pieces were incredibly strong and then allowed them to be carved and decorated. So that is the process of laminating these pieces together. This will become very, very popular again, but in a whole different way. But if you know the furniture of Charles and Ray Eames, or Eames, sometimes you'll hear it pronounced, they also use this plywood technique, but in a much different way, and quite honestly, to different ends and different stylistic ends. So then these structures feature detailed decorations on the crest top and on the rails, featuring roses, other flowers, and even baskets of mixed flowers and fruit. Excuse me. This particular structure, guys, is almost 8 feet wide. Very, very large sofa. The sofas are very large and extravagant and were the trend during the middle 19th century. So another significance I'd like you to know is that they are known for their excessive wood carving of flowers and fruits. Okay? Excessive wood carving of flowers and fruits. So this particular piece is actually a 5-legged sofa that exemplifies again the Rococo Revival style, popular in America during the 1840s and 1850s, which combined curvilinear forms and cabriole legs from 18th century French sources with extremely detailed naturalistic ornament favored in the mid-19th century, as I said. A number of American cabinet makers actually produced such furnishings for the luxury market, but it really was, the style was associated with Belter. Belter worked until his death in 1863, when his company passed to his brothers-in-law. However, mass-produced furniture was on the rise when Belter was working during the mid-1800s, and shortly after his death, his company was forced into bankruptcy, sadly, in 1867 at the hands of the industrial competition. Today, Belter is still considered one of the defining artisans of the Rococo Revival style. So very, very well known for this style. He was an innovator in furniture design. And I would like you to know that for your last significance, please. Belter was an innovator of furniture design. Notice too, guys, very, very bold color, very typical of Victorian interiors. So let's go on and let's talk about another piece. And by the way, before I do that, I want to talk to you about a couple other examples. Look at these. These are all Belter designs. And goodness, are they excessive. But excessive in a beautiful, wonderful way, right? I love the dark fabric on this one. This kind of dark raisiny type of fabric, very dark plum. Look at the ornamentation on this one. Again, grapes and flowers and grape leaves. Singular chair. This singular chair, however, has added arms. This one is quite interesting. It's almost like a chair, but not quite like a chaise lounge. And then, of course, over on the far bottom right, you see a chaise lounge. This one, on the upper right, is very interesting. And this, goodness, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was essentially a way for you to be able to sit with your loved one that you are not yet married to, but still keep yourselves under check because you're not actually sitting right next to each other on a singular couch, if that makes sense. So it's almost a way for you to sit next to your loved one, have a conversation with them, also look at them face to face without having to go beyond what was considered to be highly problematic, which is, showing physical displays of love for each other. So beautiful, interesting, and again, look at the coloration. Even with that middle piece down at the bottom here where so much of it has faded, you can still see that it was once very brightly colored at one time. Bold patterns, just excessive amount of ornamentation. Do you like it? Yeah, I think it's one of those things where either you love it or you hate it. It's a little bit much for me. I don't necessarily hate it. It's a little bit much. All right, so let's move on. Talk about monumental. That also very, very much applies to this Renaissance Revival sideboard. So again, we're talking about ideas of revival still going on at this time. The date on this is 1880. 1880. What you see here is a piece that was created by the firm of the Herter brothers. And they worked from 1864 to 1906. Their firm was founded by German immigrants Gustav and Christian Herter, and they went to New York City to found the firm. It actually began as a furniture and upholstery shop and warehouse, but after the Civil War, it became one of the first American firms to provide complete interior design services. So, significance please. One of the first American firms to provide Interior design services. One of the first American firms to provide interior design services. So with their own design office and cabinet making and upholstery workshops, the Herter brothers could provide every aspect of interior furnishing, such as decorative panels, mantels, wall and ceiling decoration, patterned floors, carpets, and even draperies. They really were designers that could do anything. They worked on many different design levels. Some of the Herter brothers' most prominent clients included those of the rich and famous, such as J. Pierpont Morgan, Jay Gould, Cyrus McCormick. The Red Room of the White House was actually furnished with Herter brothers furniture during the administration of Ulysses S. Grant. And several pieces of Herter brothers remain at the White House today, including a center table and a slipper chair. Among their most prominent clients were the Vanderbilts. Between 1879 and 1882, Herter brothers decorated William Henry Vanderbilt's new Fifth Avenue mansion. So I would like you to know for another significance is that their works were collected by the rich and famous. Their works were collected by the rich and famous. Among their most prominent, generous carving on Renaissance Revival chairs was heavier and more elaborate, being based less on flowers, fruits, and foliage, and more on classical scrolls, knots, and the like. Some piercing also appeared in the carved areas, which we do not see, which would allow you to have a little bit of a hole through, like we see with the pieces that you see here where it's actually pierced, where you can actually see air coming through. We don't see that here, but some pieces actually allow that. So again, what we're not seeing here is this kind of Rococo revival. Instead, we're seeing more of a Renaissance revival. So think going back to more classical forms, columns, egg and dart, ancient Greece, ancient Roman, even the idea of the faces that you see here, also very typical ancient Greece and Roman. So significance, please, is that this is a Renaissance revival style. Renaissance revival style. Again, using classical ornament. So a Renaissance revival sideboard that you see here was a conglomeration of wood, carving, and molding. So you can see molding that has been applied to the edges that you see here, but you also see carving going on in here, and also with the panels that you see in through here. Cabinet makers framed the doors of the cupboards, decorated with carving and with molding. They flanked the ends with carved columns or widely applied molding. So again, you can see columns in through here. Okay. And then you see molding in through here as well. All Victorian sideboards had a high backboard towering over the top surface. Renaissance revival sideboards had, in addition to being carved in all possible places, featured a back with small shelves, railings, and columns, and was oftentimes finished off with a fancy pediment. We don't see that here, but we see it in these images that you see here. Again, a feeling a little bit of a pediment back here, and again, the back that rises up, even though we don't see it in the one that is in your book, but you certainly see it here and here. And again, notice the inlays here as well. During the last couple of decades of the Victorian era, sideboards often had a framed mirror along their full length, but had much less carving. Marble, one of the great Victorian loves in terms of surfaces, became firmly established with the Renaissance revival. Tables of all sizes, commodes, bureaus, and many sideboards had marble tops. Somehow marble suited those heavy wooden pieces. Clearly, can you imagine seeing a marble slab on something that was very, very tiny and delicate looking? Cabinet makers used predominantly white and gray, and pink and chocolate marbles. So marble becomes a very popular veneer at this time as well, or surface I should even say. But again, look at all the details here. This is not Rococo. This is not curving. This is not sinuous. This is very, very solid looking Renaissance pieces. So, given that, another significance I would like you to know is that the ornament used classically inspired designs. Again, the ornament uses classically inspired designs. So we are now moving on to the aesthetic movements, which was housed in essentially chapter 13. So make sure that you have your chapter 13 images ready to go as well, and your image list. So the very first one we're going to look at for the aesthetic movements, and by the way, the aesthetic means artistic movements. So in other words, movements that have more of an artistic flair to them. So the very first one you're going to look at here, and I have to tell you, this is one of my favorite chapters. I'm very, very much influenced by this stuff, and some of my own pieces in my own house reflect these designs. So the first one you're going to look at is by a man named Charles Moretti Mackintosh, and guys, right here, I'm sorry, the SH is covered up right here. I should move that a little bit. And this is known as Hill House. The date on this is 1902 to 1903. All right, guys, that was bothering enough that I had to change it because I didn't want anybody misspelling it on your test. So the house was actually commissioned by the Blackie family, Blackie, who had made their fortune in book publishing. It combines what is called, and by the way, this is located in Scotland, it combines what is called the traditional Scottish architectural values with modern international aspirations. Essentially, it is a delicately stenciled interior, it is a interior that has delicate stenciled ornament using designs of roses and thistles and other plants that create a feeling of an indoor garden, enhanced by clever use of abundant natural light. You can see all the windows here, provided by the open site itself. So Blackie actually stipulated to Mackintosh that he wanted no bricks to be used, no plaster to be used, no wood beam construction, which is hilarious because you can see them up above, and no red tiled roof, as traditional in the west of Scotland, but we're talking primarily for the outside. Instead, Blackie asked for gray rough cast walls and a slate roof. And again, this is the exterior, not the interior. In fact, let me go ahead and show you the exterior. Look at that. It's not what you're expecting, is it? So again, let me go back for that. Blackie asked for gray rough cast walls and a slate roof, which he clearly got, and that architectural effects ought to be secured by the massing of the parts rather than ornamentation. So he's actually asking for little to no ornamentation on the outside, no bricks, no plaster, and no wood beam construction, no red tiled roof. That was very, very popular in Scotland at the time. So then, essentially, Mackintosh kind of says, yes, you're asking me to do anything else but tradition. So this non-traditional taste and these requirements that Blackie set up essentially allowed Mackintosh full reign to explore his own artistic ideas, which he will do. So let me go ahead and give you significance here, please. Okay. The non-traditional taste of the owner allowed Mackintosh creative freedom. Again, non-traditional taste of the client allowed Mackintosh, essentially, guys, creative freedom. So before creating an elevation drawing of the floor plan, Mackintosh actually spent some time in the Blackies' home to observe their everyday life. By analyzing the family's habits, Mackintosh could design every aspect of the house according to the needs of each user. He believed functional issues should be solved before allowing the design to evolve, which I think is fascinating. How many of us think, maybe I should get to know who these people are before designing for them? That's very innovative. And so then the design actually considered how the family would use the space. So I'd like you to know that for another significance is that the design reflects how the family would use the space. Again, the design reflects how the family would use the space. The Scottish architect and artist is celebrated today as a pioneer of modernism, capable of fusing Scottish and even Japanese influences with Art Nouveau for a unique aesthetic. Together with his wife Margaret MacDonald, his sister Frances, and his friend Herbert McNair, he modeled what would later become known as the Glasgow style. It is one of his innovations, even though you will also hear from another great innovator of this style, but more of an American version. So, significance, please, is that he was the innovator of the Glasgow style. He was the innovator of the Glasgow style. Glasgow. So that is how you spell Glasgow. So going on from there, the design, let me go back to the interior here. The design drew on the vernacular style of Scottish villages, the language essentially of Scottish villages, and studies of genuine simplicity. It was very, very different from the Gothic style that was popular at the time, but also the classical style that was popular at the time as well. So it's neither Gothic nor is it classical. It also does not have the Victorian excess that we just studied with the previous chapter. So another significance, please, is that it's known for its simplicity rather than Victorian excess. Known for its simplicity rather than Victorian excess. So building on the contrast between robust and bare interiors and also exquisitely decorated interiors, flaunting Eastern themes of Art Nouveau or even Art Deco details, he really kind of combines all those together. This same kind of dualism also characterizes the style of single rooms, some more feminine, other rooms more masculine. So each room will have its own distinctive style. By the way, right up and through here, you can see the stenciling that he uses. Okay, we will actually see 2 pairs of doors that he did that are absolutely also exquisite. He will use very simple designs, very aesthetically simple but very elegant designs. You can see the design of the chair here. Notice that the chair's patterning reflect the patterning in the carpeting, is also reflected here in the furniture design, also reflected in the paneling on the walls themselves, even on the doors out here. So it really is kind of an all-inclusive design. So I would like you to know that for another significance, please, it's all-inclusive design. He really is designing for every aspect of the interior. Notice that it does have very, very much a Japanese aesthetic if you are at all versed in that. Very clean, simple geometric lines, no level of excess. There's almost like a pulling away from material goods. Very simple, very functional, but also very, very elegant. So the stylish fittings of all furniture include also not only his furniture designs, but he also designed ladder back chairs, which I'll show you shortly when I show you those doors of the Salon Deluxe. Also beautiful decorative colored glasses and tiles are used throughout. So very, very beautiful designs. Creative freedom, very different than anything we've had before. I absolutely love Mackintosh's designs. Let me show you some other views of the interior here. So you can see those here, and goodness, aren't they just exquisite? So again, you can see the use of stenciling, not only on the walls, but you can see that that stenciled pattern has been used on the drapes, been used on tiles. That simple aesthetic for the furniture, those simple squares are repeated here, almost the exact same size as on the carpets. Again, that theme connects and continues through the bedroom. Look at how crisp and clean that is. And even though it's ornamented, the ornamentation does not take over the structure of the room itself. Same thing here, very simple, very clean, very ornamented. It is ornamented, but it's not excessive, and it's very, very tasteful and elegant. Just absolutely exquisite. Love his works, and I hope you do too. However, let's move on to an artist that you learned a little bit in the last chapter, and that was William Morris. Remember that William Morris was an interior designer as well. However, he is very, very well known for his wallpaper designs. And in your book, I was very pleased to find one of his designs. This is called the Pimpernel Design for Wallpaper. This was created in 1876. So Morris's designs were always very subtle, very stylized evocations of natural forms rather than literal transcriptions. So you will not find a pimpernel looking exactly like this as they wind around each other, but instead he is very, very much taking the time to carefully observe nature, but then add his own kind of stylization and patterning to it. So first significance I'd like you to know is that he's very well known for his wallpaper designs. And goodness, at a time where there was so much excess, William Morris, his wallpaper designs were very, very different, very, very artistically inspired by nature rather than the general kind of almost gaudy application of flowers that we saw in the Victorian era. So again, very, very well known for his wallpaper designs. The success of his wallpaper designs relies on his very well-practiced and close observation of nature. Every one of his designs centers on plant-based forms, whether they be expressed in a very naturalistic state, Like you see with the pimpernels, the flowers themselves look very, very naturalistic, but the way they intertwine with each other and have this created balance and symmetry is not natural. Or you'll see other forms that are flatter and more formalized, which you'll see shortly. So another significance, please, is that his designs are based on close observation of nature. Again, based on close observation of nature. So with a natural eye for pattern, Morris produced papers that were not only balanced figuration and order, but were also very unusual for the time, very distinctive, very, very different, and very, very clearly different from other less artistic patterns that were popular at the time. So another significance, please, is that he had a very distinct style apart from less artistic patterns. Okay, very distinctive style, which was apart or different from less artistic patterns. So to give you an example of what typical Victorian wallpaper designs were, I offer you this. These are not Morris designs, and you can see that they're quite flowery, quite feminine, quite over the top, and they would have covered every single inch of your house back in the Victorian times. However, to offer you exactly why William Morris's pieces were so popular is because there's a certain artistic quality to them that you do not get in the typical Victorian patterns. They're just so much more aesthetically pleasing. There's a level of restraint there, but also of excess that is much more aesthetic, if that makes sense. So then therefore, in the early 1860s, and by the way, the one on the left is one of my favorites. It's literally called Strawberry Thief, and just a little aside, I love this paper so much, or I love this design so much, that when I was in Paris at a museum, I found placemats with that fabric on them, and I actually bought them, which is so silly. So, but I love it so much, and I saw those, and I probably could get them here in the United States just as easily as I could have there, but I actually bought them. I brought them home on my flight. So crazy, right? So in the early 1860s, the British wallpaper market was actually booming with mass-produced papers that we see here that offered homeowners a cheaper alternative to textile-based wall decoration. They are very, very conscious of the desire for excessive ornament that the Victorian people wanted, but Morris takes it from something that was quite average, if not even to our eyes today quite tasteless, and instead ups the aesthetic and artistic quality to make something that is very, very pleasing to the eye. So another significance that I'd like you to know is that Victorian wallpaper was very, very popular at the time. And William Morris is even more excessively. So guys, significance please. Victorian wallpaper, very popular at the time. So with his designs, they all required a complex printing technique that involved a very large number of individual printing blocks. For every single color here, you had to have a different block. So if you're doing a woodcut or a lino cut, every single style had to have a different cut or a different block of wood for every single color that you see. Can you imagine this one with the Strawberry Thief, how many we would need with the one to the left here? So another significance that I'd like you to know is that his styles had a very complex printing technique. All right, his styles involved a very complex printing technique. His designs, therefore, were very, very popular with aristocratic circles because they were not cheap. Well, let me back off from that. Because they were so unusual, it's not about the cheapness. It's not about the cheapness. Because they were so unusual, they were very, very much followed after aristocratic circles. In fact, I'll talk to you about that in just a minute. His designs were actually hung in the London home of Morris's lifelong friend, the painter Edward Burne-Jones, in 1875, and he was a very prominent member of the artist group known as the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Morris was also endorsed by many people of wealth, and in 1880, Morris was actually asked to redecorate the rooms at London's St. James Palace, a job for which he created a special wallpaper called the St. James wallpaper. It carried a suitably lavish pattern. This design required 68 separate printing blocks to create a repeat over 2 wallpaper widths, and had to vertically repeat of 127 centimeters. That's very, very complex. So he was actually asked by royalty to create a wallpaper. In fact, in 1887, Queen Victoria herself, the Queen of England herself, actually commissioned Morris and Company to create a special wallpaper designed for her Balmoral Castle. In fact, this is it right here. Let me see if I can actually get my laser pointer. So guys, right here, this is it right here that he actually designed for Queen Victoria. So it has essentially the initials VRI. VRI means Victoria Regina Imperatrix, or Imperatrix, which essentially means Victoria, Queen, and Empress. And then, of course, it has her crown here, and then it has a thistle here, a very common motif in England. So very, very interesting that she actually asked him to design a wallpaper for specifically for her Balmoral Castle. So another significance, please, is that he created a design for Queen Victoria's castle. Okay, created a design for Queen Victoria's castle. These commissions no doubt boosted the commercial success of Morris's papers as well as helping secure his reputation. By 1884, the term Morrisonian had become a known term in the interior design trade, and wallpaper design was no longer an anonymous art. So before then, people didn't attach their names to wallpapers. And so then therefore, with his design being very, very distinctive, goodness, you could start looking for his name specifically. And even still today, when I was looking for wallpaper for a while, it's funny how you can go into a place now and actually ask for a particular person or particular designer's wallpaper. So for instance, you might have heard of the Magnolia Designs wallpaper done by Joanna Gaines. I think of many, many well-known people, even that are sometimes shown, but not as much anymore, on HGTV. Very well-known designers. The designers now are actually not as well educated or trained, I should say, as artists of the designers of the past, because we tend to like more of a homey, farmy style now. But it's interesting how you can ask for wallpapers made by a particular designer by name, which is interesting. So, all right, yeah, his works are quite amazing. Yeah, this, I'm sorry, but not so much. But the Pimpernel is just so wonderful as well. That kind of swirling, moving, undulating feeling almost has a sense of movement, whereas this feels quite flat. And then again, sense of movement with almost all of these. Just absolutely exquisite. So let's move on. So let's move on to a very fascinating work. And I'm just going to stop for a second to correct my PowerPoint. And this particular room was made by Thomas Jekyll and James McNeill Whistler. This is called the Peacock Room, and the date on this is 1876 to 77. This room is also known as Harmony in Blue and Gold for obvious reasons, even though quite honestly it is more of a turquoise than it is a really true blue, and some of you might even think it looks more green. So Whistler himself was hired by a man named Leyland. His name was Frederick Leyland, to design a room for his extensive collection of blue and white Kangxi era Chinese porcelains, and you can see them all the way through here. Now, unfortunately, after Leyland died, we know that many of his porcelains were actually sold off, and so many of the porcelains that you see in the room today are actually reproductions, and only a couple are original, but it gives us the feeling of them being in here again. So he loved his Chinese Kangxi era porcelains that are white and blue, and he heard that James McNeill Whistler was an amazing artist, and he actually asked him to design a room to show off the porcelains. So then what happens is that Leyland actually goes off on vacation and gives Whistler control of the room. Problem. We'll talk about that in a second. That's a little bit of a teaser for you. So significance I'd like you to know is that he designed a room to showcase Chinese porcelains. He designed a room to showcase Chinese porcelains. That's what was supposed to happen. We know that Whistler was very well aware of Leyland's interest in China. And so then what he did was he employed what was called back then as a chinoiserie. Chinoiserie was a style that very much meant to replicate the effects of Chinese interiors and Chinese art and design. So I'm going to have you know for significance that this is the influence, or excuse me, a style known as chinoiserie, but I'm going to spell it for you. Chinoiserie. So chinoiserie literally is a term that describes the influence of Chinese interiors and Chinese art. So the structure itself, the interior, was actually lined with 177 blue and white Chinese porcelains. It was thought, when it was completed, it was thought to be London's most lavish room at the time. So Whistler, then who was an expat of America, actually coming to London, he overhauled the dining room of the British shipping magnate Leyland in 1876 to 77. But Leyland was away while he did the work. He then let his artistic ideas overtake, quite honestly, some logic, and he began to literally roll with this idea of chinoiserie. It went far beyond the original cost that was originally planned, and he actually demanded a substantial sum increase for the redesign, leading to an irreparable rift between the artist and the patron. Leyland was startled to receive letters from Whistler on the radical redesign of his dining room and its great expense. He actually wrote to Whistler from Liverpool on October 21st, 1876, blaming him for, quote, not letting me know before developing into an elaborate scheme of decoration that was intended to be a very slight affair and the work of only a couple days, end quote. So it really began to be quite a problem. So he finished it before saying, you owe me a lot more money. So given that, Leyland actually returned in 1877 to discover a showy chamber of gold and blue inspired by peacock plumage. Peacocks were painted on the shutters, even the ceiling was consumed by design, and Whistler portrayed the antagonism in the room's centerpiece, an allegorical painting in gold and two puffed up male peacocks facing off that you see here to the right. So it looks like it's going to be a fight between these two male peacocks. So given that, I would like you to know for significance, please, is that the two male peacocks represent the arguments between Whistler and Leyland. Again, the two male peacocks represent the arguments between Whistler and Leyland. Leyland is Leyland, by the way. Leyland. So Whistler's blue, green, and gold decoration of the room was intended to complement Leyland's extensive collection, but it ended up actually taking it over. Quite honestly, I don't even know for a second that there are Chinese porcelains because I'm so overwhelmed by all the beautiful gold and this turquoise room, right? Leyland actually believed that the artist actually overstepped the terms of the commission and declared his dining room was ruined and that Whistler's time was wasted. In fact, we know that he very much criticized its excessive ornamentation and, of course, the cost. So significance, please, is that Whistler was criticized for the excessive ornamentation and cost. Again, Whistler was criticized for the excessive ornamentation and cost. Worst for Whistler is that he did not get paid. Whistler fumed in a July 1877 letter, saying that it was positively sickening to think that I should have labored to build up that exquisite peacock room for such a man to live in. Hilarious, right? But interestingly is that Leland actually kept it, which is interesting despite never having paid for it. So interesting, right? What do you think of this piece? Excessive, cool, over the top, tasteful? I think it's somewhere in between. But what do you think of you as an interior designer going far above and beyond the wishes of your patron, so to speak, and literally just thinking it's okay for you to just go far and beyond what was expected? You really are taking a chance, right? I think it's quite fascinating. But it is considered one of, and was once considered the most luxurious room in London. And even still today, it really has a lot of a great renown. So another significance, please. Once thought to be London's most luxurious rooms. Once thought to be one of London's most luxurious rooms. Here's a little detail. 2 more peacocks facing off here. And yeah, you can see a little bit more of the turquoise here with the natural light coming in here. I think it's wonderful. Again, it's not my style. I don't think I'd want it in my house, but I think it's wonderful to look at, don't you? Here's some other views as well. Fascinating, right? Absolutely fascinating. Can you imagine how much the rest of the house would not even compare? Absolutely fascinating. All right, so let's move on. So let's move on to, again, another piece by Charles Rennie Mackintosh, and this is called the Salon de Luxe doors. So the date of these doors is 1904. Now, I will tell you the image on the right is one that looks more like the one that's in your book. However, the image on the left is taken from the opposite side that allows you to see a different view of the colors. The image on the right that's in your book does not adequately show the colors on the doors themselves. So I show you 2 views, and then I'll also show you some details here in a second. This dates to 1904. So as you already know, Mackintosh was the leader of what was known as the Glasgow School. He was a talented young architect and designer, and his reputation was quickly to spread beyond his native city, not only for interior design, but also for stained glass design and design in other textiles. His works are very, very known for being simple and stylized designs based on nature. And I would like you to know that for a significance, please. Simple, stylized designs based on nature. So Mackintosh was born in Glasgow on June 7th, 1868. And guys, we're talking about Scotland here, not England. He trained as an architect in a local practice and studied art and design at evening classes at the Glasgow School of Art. At art school, Mackintosh and his friend and colleague Herbert McNair met the artist sisters Margaret and Frances MacDonald. These 4 artists collaborated on designs for furniture, metalwork, and illustration. They developed a highly distinctive array of weird images, including abstracted female figures and metamorphic lines reminiscent of Aubrey Beardsley. Say that quick 3 times if you know Aubrey Beardsley's designs. Their style earned them the nickname of what was called the Spook School, and their work, particularly in England, was treated with suspicion because of its decadent influence of continental Art Nouveau. So, significance please, influence of Art Nouveau. And I will spell that for you. It's 2 words, art, and then nouveau. Nouveau. All right. So essentially what he's going to do is then take those Art Nouveau ideas, combine it with Japanese aesthetics, arabesque forms, classical architecture, industrial forms, and symmetry. And he worked in a variety of media, including stained glass, jewelry, woodworking, painting, furniture, stencil designs, wallpaper, and architecture. So another significance, please, is that he not only worked in many different mediums, but also different cultural styles. So worked in different mediums and different cultural styles. He said this. He said that art is the flower, Life is the green leaf. Let every artist strive to make his flower a beautiful living thing, something that will convince the world that there are, and things more precious and more beautiful and more lasting than life itself. Here's some details for you. Another view of the doors, again with beautiful light coming through. And look at the cane work. So if you're familiar with stained glass design, I am a little bit. I've done a few pieces. I think I mentioned last time that I actually created a Tiffany reproduction lamp, and I've done some stained glass on my front doors of my house. But when you look over here, this is all called lead cane. And if you remember with our Gothic structure, or our Gothic interior design lecture, we talked about tracery. When iron came along and lead came along, we no longer needed to have such strong forces to keep the stained glass together with smaller pieces like this. So he's actually using a lead cane, and cane lead is actually lead that is formed into a line that you see here. And then on the inside, on either side, this side as well as that side, if you were to take a cross section of it, it would look like a capital I or a capital H, depending on how it's turned. And then it is bent in place and then soldered. You can see these little solder marks in through here. And this is just exquisite. Not only that, but some of these tiny, tiny little pieces of glass, I can't even imagine. So it's very, very time consuming and absolutely gorgeous. The architect's designs made a profound influence on what is known as not only later Art Nouveau designs. Remember that he is influenced by Art Nouveau, but he's also influential to Art Nouveau. But also the Vienna version of Art Nouveau is known as Jugendstil. I will spell that out for you in a moment. And Jugendstil became popular after Art Nouveau was already popular in Belgium and Brussels and throughout the rest of Europe. So he became a profound influence on Jugendstil artists and designers in Austria and Germany, including Koloman Moser, who saw Mackintosh's works exhibited at the Vienna Secession in 1900. Again, guys, influence of Jugendstil. It literally means youth style. It is the Vienna, or shall I say, Austrian version of Art Nouveau. And let me spell that out for you. Jugendstil. Very influential on Jugendstil artists. Again, Jugend means youth, and Stil means style. And it was the Austrian version of Art Nouveau. Let me show you some other designs that he's done. So on the left and the right are the ladder back chairs that I told you about that were popular with the very first image that we saw today with this particular chapter's lecture. He is also known for his Mackintosh rose that you see right here, okay, and also through the stained glass piece on the left here. And again, curving lines based on nature, just absolutely beautiful. And this very, very much looks like Aubrey Beardsley's works, if you're familiar with Aubrey Beardsley's pieces. Just absolutely exquisite. And the furniture, quite honestly, beautiful to look at. Reminds me of Frank Lloyd Wright's furniture, but more curvilinear, and not very comfortable to sit in, but it looks gorgeous, doesn't it? All right, so let me then tell you about furniture that is very comfortable to sit in. In fact, I have a few pieces myself, not the originals, but the old stuff. And what you're looking at here is furniture that is made by a man named Gustav Stickley. And this is his armchair. Now, I will tell you that neither one of these are the ones that is directly in your book. I decided to use a real photograph rather than a drawing. And your book looks very, very much like the one on the left, except it has stretchers on it, which the one on the right does. However, the one in your book, even though it shows an upholstered back like what you see on the left, it does not show a pattern, okay? So anyway, this is the typical Gustav Stickley armchair. The date of this is around 1905. So Gustav Stickley is actually American. He was born March 9th, 1858 in Osceola, Wisconsin, and he died April 21st in 1942 in Syracuse, New York. He was an American furniture designer and maker who largely created what came to be known as the Mission style. And three, now I think about it, 3 rooms now that I think about it, 4 rooms in my house are based along this mission style, but with a couple other things thrown in and my own style thrown in as well. Stickley, however, hated the term mission style, and instead he called it craftsman because it emphasizes the craft making skills of the artisans. So he actually called it craftsman furniture. So significance, please, is that his style is known as craftsman furniture, also known as the mission style. This style is known as craftsman furniture, also known as the mission style. So Stickley learned basic furniture making skills in a Pennsylvania chair factory owned by his uncle. After a time, he took over the factory, and in 1884, he moved it to Binghamton, New York. He experimented briefly with designs in the fashionable Art Nouveau mode before introducing, about 1900, a new line of sturdy oak furniture, and it is primarily oak in the beginning, whose virtues of simplicity, functionality, and soundness of construction were for Stickley an expression of democratic values. So I'm going to give you significance, please. Known for simplicity, functionality, and good construction. Okay? Known for simplicity, functionality, and good construction. Goodness, guys, these are just absolute tanks when it comes to furniture design. They're solid wood. If they're made right and made by Stickley or people that kind of rip off his style, it's solid construction. He's known for using quarter sawn oak, which is this beautiful, beautiful way of cutting the oak rather than straight across. It's cut on an angle, and it really brings out the veining of the wood itself. Beautiful done. Beautifully done. He established what was called the Craftsman Workshops in Syracuse in 1901 and began publishing a monthly magazine called The Craftsman to carry his ideas and designs to a wider audience. Although he owed much of his style to the British arts and crafts movement, Stickley was a highly original designer who applied his ideas not only to furniture but to decorative accessories of all kinds. One of the most popular features of the Craftsman was a series of house designs that was intended to suit modest incomes, an interest of the arts and crafts movement based on Christian socialism. So he actually got into architectural design as well. So even though these pieces are made of oak was a wood that was affordable by many, many people. And even though you can go to a Stickley design warehouse and buy other even more expensive woods today, like cherry, it is still the most popular wood, oak itself. So his works are not only well made, they oftentimes will also show visible construction. So like you see on the top of this right here, this is actually a joinery piece that is covering over the area that actually takes a wooden dowel and goes through the arm to attach it to the leg here. You will also see dowels present here and on the sides here to connect all of these pieces together. So known for visible construction, or you can say joinery, and quarter sawn oak. Those are hallmarks of the Craftsman style. So significance, please, known for using visible construction and stained oak. Known for using visible construction and stained oak. Why show visible construction? Because he was very, very much in favor of handmade furniture versus factory made. He felt that factory made materials were of subpar quality, were made by machines and not man, and that handmade construction not only permitted the worker to be very, very proud of what they did, but also it allowed the worker to see the work of the furniture piece from beginning construction all the way through to the end, and allowed that level of pride that can only be found from the entire process. So he envisioned a furniture that had a level of quality, of simplicity, but also transparency and practicality without sacrificing quality of beauty. He did not believe in overly ornate designs. They're very simple designs. They're very solid, and let me tell you, they're heavy as all get out. So he also envisioned inornate, meaning not ornate, quality furniture that was admired not for its prestigious or fancy materials, but for beautiful construction. He rejected the subpar quality of furniture made through industrialization, and while his company eventually used factories to produce chairs to keep up with the demand, they were still hand assembled and finished by craftsmen, even still today if you go to a Stickley warehouse. This was a compromise that allowed the furniture to be readily available without sacrificing quality. So, another significance, please, is that he was against furniture made. Let me say that again. He was against factory made furniture and preferred handmade. He was against factory made furniture and preferred more of the handmade pieces. By the way, for a time, Stickley furniture was actually made here in Grand Rapids. Now this chair is a straight chair back Stickley Morris chair. You might have heard of this term before, Morris chair. A little bit unusual is that you see a tufted back. I have never seen that before. This is a bow arm Morris chair made by Stickley. And I have one of these. In fact, when I was your age in my early 20s, I actually got a very cheap version, and the veneers did not last long, I have to tell you. But I was so excited that I had even a cheap version of a Stickley chair. And I finally got my very first official Stickley chair. It's not new, it's an antique, but I absolutely adore it. So, and by the way, mine is actually a recliner. You can actually recline these. Now, in the beginning, they had pegs along the back right through here on this side, and actually also on the back arm, where you could then take a wooden peg out and move it from 3 different positions so you can be seated up or actually reclining down in 3 different positions. Mine is more automatic, to be honest with you. Kind of cheesy. I have a recliner, but I love it. So this is also some Stickley furniture pieces. This is called the slat settle. You can see also the slats here on the desk, slats on the back here, and notice the joinery that you see right here. And you can see here the quaint furniture company of Stickley Brothers in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Kind of fun, right? So again, beautifully handmade furniture that's all about quality and restrained detail that's simple and affordable. I cannot say it's made for the average student wages, I'm sorry to say, but guys, if you really love it, start saving up for it. It's just absolutely gorgeous furniture, and I absolutely love it. So let's move on to something else here, and this will be our last piece, and it very, very much fits in with this idea of arts and crafts, of mission, and of craftsmen. And this is Green and Green, the Gamble House. And again, I would give my right arm almost to live into this house. So this is called Arts and Crafts again, and this is an Arts and Crafts masterpiece. So I would like you to know that for significance, please. It's an Arts and Crafts masterpiece. And the very typical design for an Arts and Crafts house is called a bungalow. A bungalow is usually referred to as a smaller house that is designed under the Arts and Crafts style. However, this is a large house. So, however, it is considered to be the ultimate bungalow house. Every now and then you will see them throughout Grand Rapids. I've seen a few in East Grand Rapids, again, smaller houses. I've seen a few just inside or just outside the line of Heritage Hill as you are around Cherry and Paris, right in there. So another significance, please, this is the ultimate bungalow house. The ultimate bungalow house. The house and furnishings were actually designed by Charles and Henry Green in 1908 for David and Mary Gamble of the Procter & Gamble Company that's very much around today. It is today considered a National Historic Landmark, and the house is owned by the city of Pasadena and operated by the Gamble House Conservancy. So guys, we are in California, even though the arts and crafts styles were popular throughout the states. The 3-story Gamble House is commonly described as America's arts and crafts masterpiece. Its style shows influence from Japanese aesthetics and, of course, the arts and crafts movement. So Let me go back to that in a second. Let me give you another view. Let's look at this real quick. Again, very, very simple straight lines. The curve that you see here is unusual. So we do not see a lot of curves. Straight lines, simple design, good construction, emphasis on wood. Now there is a decent amount of ornamentation, but it's reserved ornamentation. Very, very unlike the Victorian that we just finished with the last chapter. Notice too that the emphasis is on all aspects of design. It's all over the place, and that emphasis on wood actually led to a lot of deforestation of the United States. Unfortunately, I giggle, but it's very, very sad. Notice too, emphasis on stained glass. Isn't that gorgeous? And I believe that I have a detail for you later. Again, what we see here is even arts and crafts style planters, furniture design, lamp design, light fixtures, all over the place, even furniture, fireplace and even mantle design. So another significance, please, is all-inclusive design. And you guys remember what that is, all-inclusive design. So given that the arts and crafts movement in American craftsman style architecture was focused on the use of natural materials, attention to detail, aesthetics, and craftsmanship. That's why it's called the arts and the crafts, or the craftsmanship or craftsman style. The building itself appears enmeshed with the landscape. Let me show you the details. Here's the exterior here. Isn't it wonderful? But do you get a little bit of a feeling of Japanese architecture? I know I do. So it is achieved by a blend of man-made materials such as brick and rough dash coat stucco on the outside. Also natural materials such as granite river stones and creeping fig, the tree that's growing up along the side of it, on the foundations and on the terraces of the steps here. Notice too that you also have shingles on the outside. The house displays a very strong influence of Japanese architecture. The abstraction of the clouds that you see and through here, and the tree design very much recalls Japanese landscapes and printmaking such as ukiyo-e. You also see the brackets that are common in Japanese architecture, almost the feeling of what we will call shoji screens that are made of rice paper, but only here on the upper portion. In Japanese architecture, would be all the way down to the ground. Other what are called Asian characteristics applied to the house's doors, windows, screens, beams, chairs, lanterns, and other aspects of the house show its emphasis on nature, much the way that Japanese art does as well. So another significance, please, is that there's a strong influence of Japanese architecture. Strong influence of Japanese architecture. You can especially see it in the middle image here on the staircase that goes up. Very, very strongly Japanese. However, another significance that I'd like you to know is that it's a mixture of man-made and natural-made materials. Okay? Influence of man-made and natural-made materials. Look at the wood. I absolutely adore it. We are so entrenched right now in interiors of houses that are so white. The white kitchen is so popular right now. In fact, my last house, I had a white kitchen. I absolutely loved it. But the white kitchens, as much as you love them for their brightness and their cheeriness, it does not have a richness that wood like this can offer. Absolutely exquisite. So, going on from here, the rooms of the home were built using multiple kinds of woods: teak, maple, oak, Port Orford cedar, and mahogany surfaces are placed in sequences to bring out the contrast of color, tone, and grain. So again, oak tends to be very honey. When you see teak, it tends to be a little bit more of an ashy color. When we think of mahogany, we think of more of a red. So very, very different. So inlay in the custom furniture designed by the architects coordinates with the inlay in the tiled fireplace surrounds, as you can see to the left, and the expressed interlocking joinery on the main staircase that you see here in the middle was also exposed. So this is all that mortise and tenon joinery that we talked about earlier. Ceiling heights also differ from room to room. As you see here, the ceiling height is not very tall at all, but when you look into the dining room, it's taller here. Interesting, right? So ceiling heights are different on the first floor, 8 foot 10 inches, second floors 8 foot 8 inches, and in the den 9 foot 10 inches. And the forms and scales are spaces that are constantly shifting in effect, especially as one moves from interior of the house to the second floor level to a semi-enclosed porches and its free-form terraces, front and rear. It very, very much reminds me of if you've ever been into a Frank Lloyd Wright house, even the Meyer May house that is located here in Grand Rapids. And goodness, guys, I would love it once we get done with COVID if you were able to take a tour through the Meyer May house. It is so worth it. And by the way, it's free. So another significance, please, is that he's known for intimate shifting spaces of different sizes. Known for intimate shifting spaces of different sizes. Again, this is an arts and crafts masterpiece. What do you think? I kid you not, it truly makes my mouth water. I just absolutely love it. All right, guys, this ends, I should say, our discussion of chapters 12 and 13. It was a long one. Thank you very much for being patient. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening.